At long last, the European Union has hit upon the solution, yet another solution, to its refugee crisis. It is to bribe Turkey to take back migrants who illegally made their way into the EU by crossing Turkey. The deportations have begun, as the BBC shows, thus beginning the first fully centralised, EU-authorised, illegal pushback operation in the Union's history, wherein refugees who have the right to apply for asylum are denied the chance to do so. As Reuters reports, Turkey will be rewarded for its participation with money, visa-free travel and progress in its EU membership negotiations. But the other currency with which Turkish cooperation is being purchased is Kurdish blood. As the European Parliament's rapporteur on Turkey pointed out in his piece by Reuters, the Union has grown strangely silent on the country's human rights abuses in exchange for help with the refugee crisis. For since the middle of last year, Turkey has been engaging in a war against the Kurdish population in the southeast of the country, as well as the exile forces based in northern Iraq. Erdogan is strident. According to the Turkish president, as Reuters reports, there is no room for dialogue. The terrorists can choose two paths: surrender to justice or be neutralised one by one. Now, this is quite a reversal. It was Erdogan who, in his drive to put manners on the army so that the civilian Islamists could gain more leverage, thawed relations with the Kurds and began peace talks with Abdullah Öcalan. And since 2013, it was he who pursued a tentative ceasefire in the teeth of secular opposition, the previously dominant secular nationalists regarding peace with the Kurds as a defeat for Turkey. In this new climate, and notwithstanding Erdogan's ongoing sabre-rattling against the Kurds, the left-wing Kurdish politician Selahattin Demirtas was able to make a breakthrough in the 2014 presidential elections. But on 7th of June last year, the People's Democratic Party, formed in 2012 and led by Demirtas, made another breakthrough, gaining 13% of the vote in the national parliamentary elections and depriving the ruling Justice and Development Party of the majority it sought in order to change the constitution to preserve Erdogan's eroding power. As Soner Kagaptay wrote for The Atlantic, Kurds, liberal, conservative and nationalist alike, coalesced around the Kurdish Nationalist People's Democratic Party, including many who had previously voted for Erdogan or the secular Nationalist Republican People's Party. This, taken together with gains made by Kurdish forces in Iraq and Syria, changed the game in Turkey. The peace process broke down the following month, and as Middle East expert Duan Cole wrote for his website Informed Comment, the widely publicised war against ISIS quickly became a campaign against the Kurds instead. The crackdown was indiscriminate. As Nicholas Glassbury reports on Jadaliyah, and unmentioned on international news media, when the Islamic State committed a notorious massacre of Kurds in Shuruk, Turkish forces brutally suppressed the ensuing Kurdish protests. The Kurdish Workers' Party quickly responded to the government's escalation, declaring the conditions for peace eliminated. Demirtas, writing for Newsweek, argued that our victory in the June elections alone denied the ruling nationalist sectarian party its 13-year single-party reign. President Erdogan craftily blocked the formation of a coalition government, declared us terrorists immediately after the elections, ended the peace process entirely, and took the people back to the horrors of the civil war from the 90s. As Kurdish areas experimented with forms of self-government, Turkey imposed military rule on towns and cities across the southeast of the country. Erdogan warned that they would be annihilated, and the war would continue until Kurdish towns were completely cleansed of fighters, as Al Monitor shows. An atmosphere of pogrom spread. Already in the run-up to the June elections, Jacobin reports widespread violence against the People's Democratic Party, with 200 attacks on rallies, campaigners and party buildings. As the war resumed, dozens of People's Democratic Party offices were attacked by mobs across Turkey. And the BBC quotes a People's Democratic Party spokesperson saying, "As the headquarters in Ankara were attacked, police are just watching. What's being broken there is our hope of living together." In the southwest, a Kurdish man was targeted for a social media message supporting the Peshmerga by being forced by a local mob to kiss a statue of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of Turkey, shown by this Turkish news site. This mob action, condoned by police, was not isolated from official action. A few hours before the firebombings, Vijay Prashad writes, the Turkish Air Force and Special Forces units struck PKK bases in Aveshin, Bazian, Kandil and Zap in Iraq. Amnesty International has described the war as collective punishment of the civilian population, displacing 200,000 as of January and leaving families trapped in the besieged towns and cities without water and electricity. The International Crisis Group estimated at least 250 civilian deaths in March, likely a grave underestimate given the lack of access humanitarian workers have to the sieged towns. As usual with the Justice and Development Party, its spokespersons have resorted to conspiracy theories to explain away the causes of war. Mehmet Metiner, a member of the Turkish parliament, writes for Al Jazeera that Kurdish Workers' Party attacks are a ploy by global and regional powers that are concerned about Turkey's emergence as a powerful actor on the stage of history. They want to turn Turkey into the next Iraq or Syria, thereby paving the way for foreign intervention. However, the evidence is that global powers are on Turkey's side. As the Wall Street Journal reports in its piece, Turkey to consult with NATO on ISIS-PKK strikes, the response by NATO and the EU to Turkey's war was to collaborate with the regime and defend its right to self-defense, insisting only that the war be proportionate. An Associated Press report on the assault is typical in citing only Turkish government sources. The Turkish military says, security forces say, the army said. It also refers to the war as security operations, citing none of the human rights abuses conducted by the military. Reuters follows the same pattern. In a recent report on the offensive in Diyarbakir, the southeast's second largest city, it cites only official sources. Security sources said, according to the armed forces, the military said. It references only one civilian death, which, citing the Turkish military, it attributes to an attack by Kurdish forces. In part, the sanitized reporting derives from the Turkish government's internet shutdowns and control of information coming out of the war zones. One of the few cracks in the blackout came in January when footage was circulated in some international media of Turkish forces in the besieged town of Cizre shooting dead a number of unarmed Kurds who were waving a white flag, as shown here by The Independent. So while much of the media coverage has accepted the official terminology of counterinsurgency, it has fallen to independent news providers such as Democracy Now! To provide more detailed reporting on the military curfews, firebombings, airstrikes, and a shattered peace deal. Missing in much of the coverage of the war is Erdogan's systematic crackdown on the press. As the Committee to Protect Journalists reports, dozens of journalists, particularly those associated with the secular nationalist newspaper Cumhuriyet, have been harassed, insulted, arrested and put on secret trial by the government, which accuses them of espionage and aiding a terrorist organization. This is not to say that there is no criticism of Erdogan's crackdown. Doug Sanders, writing for the Globe and Mail, is scathing. Turkish soldiers and police surrounded the offices of Zaman, the country's largest and by some measures best newspaper, fired tear gas, broke down the doors and seized control of the paper and its media empire with authorization from courts appointed by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his party. By Sunday morning, the paper, known for its independent-minded columnists, was publishing the most anodyne form of government propaganda. However, the fact that the EU and NATO have given their blessing to Erdogan's security operation tends to mean that the war against the Kurds is treated as a separate issue, covered almost entirely in terms of security. Notably, where media attention has been drawn to Erdogan's crackdowns, it has often been by virtue of his own overreactions to criticism. In publicly condemning the mild criticisms made by Obama at an underreported summit, covered by Reuters, and then denouncing the academic Noam Chomsky for criticizing the massacre of Kurds, shown by The Guardian, he has often fallen victim to the Streisand effect, giving prominence to issues that the media might otherwise have missed. And part of the justification for the alliance with Turkey and for its ongoing military offensives is that it is a participant in the bombing campaign against ISIS. And by subsuming the massacre of Kurds into a war on terror, Erdogan courts the support of the US and its allies. And this makes it all the more important that the majority of the media has either ignored or downplayed the evidence compiled by Columbia University's Institute for the Study of Human Rights and published on Huffington Post that Turkey has provided tacit logistical support for ISIS fighters, among whose opponents are the Kurdish forces. And ultimately what is missing in most of the media coverage is any sense of the way in which Erdogan's offensives on all fronts the crushing of the peace process, the bombings in Iraq, Syria and the Turkish southeast, the crackdowns on academics and journalists who oppose the regime, the mob violence are part of a unified strategy by the regime. Having seen its electoral coalition shrink and splinter, having been exposed to waves of protest and being buffeted on all sides by serious allegations of corruption, the evidence is that the government is using the Kurdish war to consolidate a deeply autocratic regime and stave off the investigations, prosecutions and further disintegration that would undoubtedly arise were the Justice and Development Party to lose power. That is the character of the regime that the EU is allied with in order to drive out refugees who have a legal right to claim asylum status. That is the regime whose incorporation the EU has promised to expedite as part of its bribery for the refugee deal. And this is a pact that would be much harder to pull off were it not for the downplaying of Turkey's war in the international media.